Hello, I'm Jorge Gestoso. Welcome to a new program. On today's show, after the results of Super Tuesday, it has already been chosen the candidate for the presidency of the Democratic Party, or could be some surprises. We ask our guest, Emilio Viano, Professor Emeritus of American University. Emilio Viano, a warm welcome to the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
Emilio, on Wednesday, Mike Bloomberg dropped from the campaign and he decided to support Joe Biden. It has already been decided who is going to be then the presidential candidate for the Democrats?
In my opinion, yes. It has been basically decided. The establishment has certainly finally won this battle. The electoral triumph of Biden in South Carolina really started this movement that has been dramatic, very swift, and very clear. Biden has obtained an enormous victories in the Super Tuesday, and he has the support now of all those who were, of course, competing with him: Buttigieg, Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke, Bloomberg, and maybe others in the near future, which also means that he is going to get money to support his campaign, which is something that we shouldn't forget, that once people coalesce around a candidate, it also means that the spigot of money that were directed at others are going to direct it towards him. And that means a lot when there are enormous costs in organizing and running a campaign, particularly against someone like President Trump.
What do you think that President Trump is going to do now that it's quite clear that he has a lot of possibilities to become the nominee? We're talking about Joe Biden, given the fact that he was already trying to get dirt from Ukraine.
Well, I think that, in my opinion, Trump would have preferred Sanders as the candidate to the Democratic Party, because it would have been easier to demolish him on very simple but very passionately felt points of view. For example, the fact that he is described himself as a socialist, and wrongly so. In the US, socialist is often identified with communist, which of course is a dirty word in this country. And then, of course, Sanders helped a little bit when he praised Fidel Castro, which obviously didn't go well with many of the conservatives, particularly those Latinos that often are, anti-castristas to the core. And also the fact that he is, or has been said to have traveled to communist countries years ago, so that in a way he has not helped very much. For Trump, it would have been very easy to demolish him just on that, on the fact that he is a socialist, which means communist, which means someone that finds Fidel Castro.
A revolutionary.
Exactly. And someone that would take away from them what they are entitled to by imposing governmental-run programs, which of course conveniently are described as being always a waste of money, a waste of time, don't work, are corrupt, inefficient, even if it is not always that way. So for Trump, I think it's been a disappointment to see this happening so quickly. Now, with Biden, I suppose they still hope to find negative information in Ukraine, and the lawyer of the president, Giuliani, recently gave to the Attorney General Barr material supposedly obtained there that is damaging to the reputation of the Bidens. So I think that probably now they're furiously trying to uncover anything that is possible in order to tarnish his reputation and depict him as not being the good, affable, centrist, commonsensical, gentle, loving, father, grandfather, widower, and someone who lost a son. But all stories that make him extremely attractive to a lot of people for the humane content that they have, including that when he was senator here in Washington, he traveled every night back home to Delaware to be with his family. So he has many human elements, and then he relates very well to the working class because of the origin of his family in Pennsylvania. So he has tremendous appeal, and I'm sure that Trump is working very hard, but there is no question, in my opinion, that the establishment has closed ranks behind Biden because they see him as the only real possible viable candidate. Sanders was perceived as being too extremist, too rigid even in the way of presenting his plan, and also, unfortunately, in my opinion, he didn't need to do it, referring to Fidel Castro and others, which raised, of course, the hackles of many people, particularly Latinos, let's say in South Florida and in other parts of the country that don't approve of the Castro.
What do you think that could be the foreign policy of Joe Biden regarding Latin America, for example?
Well, I think that he would probably be much more positive than Trump, particularly towards Cuba, in the sense that I think that he would probably reinstate the agreements that Obama negotiated with the Cuban government, reopen diplomatic relations, sending of money, visits, tourism, investments in the island. So I think that it would be more positive than what is going on right now. And also I think it would be a more soft approach to immigration from Mexico and Central America and South America, respecting more international treaties, the right of refuge, the petitions for asylum. I think it would be a much more humane and respectful procedure in dealing with people trying to enter into the United States. So in that respect, I think it would be a more positive atmosphere. Of course, this depends from also the point of view of the governments in South America and how they perceive the U.S. But in general, I think it would be a more positive attitude. Unfortunately, in general, the U.S. have been very neglectful of Latin America. And they have actually opened wide possibilities for China in particular and even Russia. But hopefully, at least this would be a more positive note.
Candidate Joe Biden was mentioning, for example, the Dreamers are going to stay here. That's a pretty positive message for the dreamers that are waiting to see what is going to be her future.
Exactly. As I said, it would be honoring more some of the policies that Obama introduced, particularly related to the dreamers, and also accepting the reality that they have been here forever and they have nowhere to go in reality. This is their country. And also that they are very positive, contributing members of our society. They cannot be transformed so easily in a toy that a politician can use to get votes and the applause of his base, as Trump has done.
And in the case of Bernie Sanders, would you discard that the tide could change and he could end up being the nominated, or you think that it's not going to be any possible surprise from here to the convention?
I think it would be very hard at this point for him to really overcome. Because, first of all, none of the people who have quit the race that were among the possible candidates of the Democratic Party have given him their support. The only one that one might expect possibly would be Senator Warren, because her positions are very similar and probably even better founded and more detailed in their plans than those of Sanders. But no, I think that he would find it extremely difficult because no one has taken his camp, Buttigieg, Klobuchar, O'Rourke, none of them, Bloomberg, haven't given him their support. And this is very, very telling, how he is perceived. He is not perceived as someone that can win, because in the end, this is a very conservative country. And the message that he had was one of a revolution. And quite possibly this revolution is needed, but people have difficulty accepting it because there is, as in any country, a certain history of what the country is all about, a certain mentality of who we are and what we should be, a certain approval of the capitalist system, because even though we talk very often of the 1%, people actually would like to be there. And so in a way, they don't necessarily criticize as much emotionally the very wealthy, because in the end, even if they only play the lottery, they would like to be there too. It is not something that they reject. And it is a bit different from other countries where there has been more populist, social democratic traditions. Here, it never really took root. It never made it. There's always been a reason, starting with Ronald Reagan, when he also began to favor openly the 1%, with the famous theory of the trickling down wealth. In other words, if we give a lot of money to the wealthy, they will spend it, and some of those crumbs are going to come down to us, to the lower class or middle class, which of course doesn't necessarily happen. But people buy into it. And so for them it's very difficult to envision a movement where there will be more social and economic equality. People have this dream that here everything is possible. And every president, of course, plays on that. Even Obama did, talking about the exceptionalism of the Americans. I personally think there is nothing exceptional. Actually, we are falling behind in infrastructure, in the use of technology. China and other countries are beating us to that very easily. But people don't travel that much. They are not that open to accepting that other countries can be better. They are not as well informed. And therefore, they keep continuing thinking that this is the best country ever, that there is no other country that is as good. While in reality, from the point of view of ordinary life of every day for any of us, there are much better countries where to conduct your business.
The past Saturday, it was a huge victory of Joe Biden in South Carolina. He won by 30 points against the second place that was Bernie Sanders, supported by the African American community. And that was sort of the changing of the wave. The tide has changed, and there was a wave of messages. And we have seen that in the following 72 hours to Super Tuesday, in all the mass media, the key media, the only thing that we were hearing was guests that were talking very nicely about Biden. We were seeing in a repetitive way that Biden was the only candidate that was having possibilities, and they were placing Joe Biden as the real alternative. It was clear what even Bernie Sanders said. Bernie Sanders says, the establishment is very, very worried about me. And in a way, what I'm trying to ask you is, people are not informed, but that dream to become millionaires and everything, at which point the media is an arm of the establishment in order to aspire to that, and not necessarily questioning if you, as a regular citizen, or as a middle-class citizen, or vulnerable people, you should have more rights to live better and not to aspire to something while you are living in poverty. How much the media contributes to that rhetoric that you have to be materialistic and millionaire?
Well, certainly the media reflects the values of the country, because
it's a private media. It's private media.
It reflects the values of the country because it is a business, and they cannot turn people off so that they don't listen to them and go to another channel, because they make money through the advertisement, and that depends also on the ratings that they get on people listening and paying attention to them and not to someone else. So, and we know that unfortunately as a new phenomenon, besides the impact of the internet and the electronic medias basically eliminating printed newspapers, there are big financial conglomerates in this country that are buying newspapers left and right to make them a profit center by cutting the number of reporters down to the bone, giving them very little support financially to do their work, imposing a certain view and certain limitations of what they can or they cannot say, and basically in a way destroying a very strong journalistic tradition that we have in this country. We see basically every day the disappearance of newspapers, particularly at the local level, but even at the national level. Even a newspaper as prestigious as the Chicago Tribune now is in the hands of an investment fund who tells them in many different ways what to do. So we can depend even on less information in the future from this point of view. And this is certainly a danger for our country, because then the politicians, particularly one like Trump, through his tweets, becomes the source of information for many people. They don't even listen to television news or read the newspaper. They read the tweets of the president, and they take that as being the reality. And this is extremely dangerous for a democracy.
7 states in the Southeast were absolutely wiped out by Biden. 2 out of 3 African Americans were voting for him. And in the other side, we have seen Bernie Sanders with young people, and also we're talking about Latins or Hispanics. But it was a new phenomenon, very interesting or very important, that in the suburbs, white people, male and female, especially females, were voting for Joe Biden. That could be the turning point to make sure that Joe Biden ends up being the nominee.
I think so. Certainly Biden will have to take into account very openly, seriously, and concretely the support that he received from the African Americans, because they are at times not happy in the sense that they have given a lot of support, obviously, to Obama and others, and they feel that they are taken for granted. So he will have to show, particularly to this congressman from South Carolina, Clyburn, who really appears to be the hero, so to speak, of the change of the tide, because his endorsement in South Carolina clinched in the victory of Biden there and opened the floodgates of then all the other states. There is a majority of Afro-Americans. In that respect, I think that certainly that is something that Biden will have to take into account. As far as the suburban voters, definitely, because they have a certain vision that is very much centrist. They cannot accept easily what Sanders is proposing, because many of them live pretty good lives, have pretty good jobs, have pretty good benefits, can send their children to good schools, to good universities. So they don't necessarily appreciate, so to speak, what it means to talk about universal health care imposed on everybody, one size fits all, that they don't necessarily appreciate. But then don't forget one thing, that even some professions that are not that glamorous, let's say a miner in the middle of Pennsylvania. I know a family of miners there where the father gains $105,000 a year being a coal miner. This is not the coal miner that many people fantasize or think they know. And he said they have an excellent health plan. So he says, I don't want to hear anything about taking that away from me. We are living a wonderful life because the cost of life here is very low. Real estate is very cheap. Taxes are very low. I'm doing fine. $105,000 a year, excellent health plan. What do you want more? And that is where I think that Sanders' message has attracted the attention, particularly of young people that are yearning for change and also worried about their future, and the fact that the nature of jobs and employments is changing dramatically with robots, artificial intelligence, etc. But for the people who are established, particularly in the suburbs, and have solid futures, a nice bank account, some money in Wall Street, a nice house, a good car, they don't want to share it. They want more of it. And that is where the socialism really doesn't make it.
Everybody observed that Bernie Sanders have very little margin of reshaping his campaign. Do you think that he is going to try to tweak his message in a way from here on to try to be more competitive, to be more flexible, to attract more people that deserted to Joe Biden?
I think that that would be very dangerous for him and for his reputation, because he has insisted so clearly. His message has been so uncompromising.
Consistent.
And consistent that for him to change the music now would mean that people are just going to give up on him, and particularly those who support him the most, particularly the young people, would feel terribly betrayed, because they would see it clearly for what it is. You are betraying the ideals. You are telling us that what you told us before, it was not really seriously felt by you in order to get a benefit, your election. And that is something that would not sit well with everybody. I think the best that they can do, in my opinion, of course, is for him to find an agreement eventually with Biden, where there is a sharing of policies, where Biden gives assurances that some of the main points of the manifesto of Sanders are going to be integrated in the Democratic platform, at the convention this coming summer, so that they are acknowledged, they are, if you will, canonized by the party, they become official doctrine of the Democrats, and Biden commits to make sure they are implemented, even if not to the level that Sanders has proposed. Like, in reality, for many people, there is no need to impose one system of health care for everybody. It's important to provide one, like Obama tried to do, but if someone has a better one or one that they prefer, there is no need to take it away from them either. So more of a compromise. On the way, maybe someday, to introduce a universal health care, but to do it so abruptly, particularly with all the resistance by the Republicans that are gaining court right now in the front of the Supreme Court, trying to get the law nullified, it is just too much, too fast, and too dramatic for many people.
In the case of Bloomberg, he has said, at least before to drop, that he was going to be committed to support the candidate, whoever is going to be the candidate, until the end. And there are people who observe that many of his advertising, the messages, was not necessarily attacking the other rivals. It was true that he was really attacking Bernie Sanders very, very, very directly. But he was attacking Donald Trump. Do you believe that if Bloomberg continues to put on the air advertising, attacking Trump left and right, and spending millions and millions and hundreds of millions, would help the campaign, even financing eventually Joe Biden?
Not only if it will help, it will be almost indispensable to Biden, because Biden has spent very little money, 16 millions up to date, when the other has spent 500 million. And Biden doesn't have a structure in most of the states. In other words, being named candidate doesn't mean that you are going to run an efficient and successful campaign. You need all sorts of infrastructure, and that infrastructure in our tradition here in this country is at the state level. And that's where Bloomberg can be enormously helpful, because he has built, one has to recognize this, of course he had the money, but still, he has built a great infrastructure, particularly in many states in the middle of the country that were key to the victory of Trump. So in that respect, Bloomberg can play a fantastic role. He has to be brought in by the candidate that will be the standard bearer.
Do you believe that Joe Biden can beat Donald Trump?
I hope so.
Emilio Viano, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.